Hey everyone, welcome to our very first Modio Fireside Chat. I am Parissa and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for today's discussion on the exciting intersection of AI and healthcare credentialing. Modio Health, founded in 2014, has been a pioneer in shaping the healthcare industry with our cloud-based credentialing and career management solutions. As we know, healthcare is undergoing a rapid transformation and AI is at the forefront of driving this change. Today, we're diving deep into how AI is revolutionizing the complex world of healthcare credentialing. We'll explore how this technology is not just automating, but fundamentally enhancing the critical process to ensure the right professionals are equipped to deliver exceptional care. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce our industry-leading experts here at Modio Health. First, we have John Bowe, who is our VP of Operations and co-founder of Modio Health. John has over 15 years of product and marketing leadership experience in health tech. He is responsible for Modio's product, vision, and user growth. Second, we have Rich Rupp, who is our Senior Director of Information Technology for Engineering here at Modio Health. Rich has led product and technology roles in the industry and has over 20 years of experience. Hi guys, thanks for joining me today's chat.
Thanks, Parissa.
Hey, Parissa, thanks. And thanks for the intro.
Of course.
And I think before really we jump into the topic and do that deep dive, I think it'll be helpful just to define what we mean when we talk about AI. It's such a massive topic. I think there's been a ton of definition to talk about this probably 6 months to a year ago, a little less chatter today, but still sort of super critical. When I think of AI and kind of credentialing where it crosses over, really, it's probably around two kind of areas. One is, and Rich will probably go deeper into this, is sort of the LLM, built around sort of natural language processing. People have seen this with generative AI. It's probably most people's first experience with it, why it kind of blew up a year ago, where people are using ChatGPT for content and asking questions and images around sort of DALL-E and that software. And then the second thing is really around, I think, around machine learning, where we can apply a lot of AI, where you have large sort of data sets you're dealing with a set of rules and parameters, and then sort of shepherding that through a process, sort of a repetitive process. So a really good place for AI and to go. And I think those are the two topics that I think, really are relevant to the credentialing discussion today. I don't know, Rich, if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, with regards to credentialing specifically, we're probably, at least for our interest, is going to be more around the LLMs or training the data models. AI is trying to simulate the, human intelligence process. And I use the word simulate, and, everywhere from learning to reasoning. And for us, it's really around the data and the output of the data, because within credentialing specifically, data integrity is probably one of the hottest topics. And there are, primary sources and sources providing data that are inaccurate, and there are humans providing data that is inaccurate. And so for us, it's around the accuracy of the data. And as far as AI is concerned, with application for credentialing, we're really looking at efficiency, accuracy, and then security, which, we'll touch on later. I do believe generative AI is a critical component when it comes to AI in general. A lot of times it's used for creation of images or content, or, summarization is a good example, or even music. Within credentialing, for us specifically, we are more sort of interested in LLMs or the actual data sets themselves. There is definitely a role in generative AI, but for us, we see LLMs as much more critical than the actual generating, let's say, some new piece of content. I mean, obviously, for credentialers, summarizing is important, and condensing and consolidating information. But when you're dealing with sort of predefined formats like an application, there is no summarization. It's about the integrity of the application itself. Where it might play really well is when you get some sort of assets, whether that's a photo of a driver's license or a photo of a DEA registration or something like that, or you need to for some reason produce, although it wouldn't be considered primary, that information. So for us, it's more about a focus on the data itself and not so much on the creative process of generating something from the data. And then with regards to sort of the strength of AI, whether you're weak, strong, or super intelligent, and obviously, the AI strives to be super intelligent. We're really just dabbling in weak. We're not really in replacing the human or reasoning at the level of a human at this point in time. It's more about humans training a model to be more accurate and not necessarily replacing or reaching that state of super intelligence.
I agree. I agree with you, Rich, on the bulk of the sort of work of AI will be around LLM and how it applies to data and how we're treating data. I do think there's probably a good niche for generative AI. In credentialing, there's a lot of communication between credentialer, provider, and then credentialing body, the payer, the hospital, the state, the boards, let's say. And I think a lot of that is repetitive based on sort of a set of rules that you could probably apply sort of machine learning plus generative AI to create those emails. Here, I have the set of data come in. This is the payer that I need to credential to. What are the emails then based on the data gaps that I'm missing, the signatures that I need, the status that I'm in? And I could see a place where you have generative AI creating emails, text messages, going out to these folks really automatically, where it looks like and sounds like you're talking to a human. It's based on a pretty clear set of rules of when these need to go out, what needs to be said. Follow-up can happen based on an interaction can happen based on what's sort of responded. So I think while the bulk is around the data and LLM, I think there's probably a role for generative AI in there on some level.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I agree. Chatbots are a perfect example of, there's certainly plenty of examples to help a provider along the way with the chatbot. And I'm not saying, as part of a parent company, CHG, that does, recruiting for locum tenens providers, tremendous opportunity to help the provider along the way with their reservations, their travel, and all that sort of information. But within Modio and credentialing, for us, it's really centered around the accuracy of the data and the efficiency of the process. And certainly there are opportunities for the chatbot to help people along the way. But we're really looking to sort of help get the data right and to eliminate processes or inefficient processes where possible. And generative AI will complement and be a good part of it, but certainly I'm a little bit biased. That's not my initial focus.
I agree. And I think, like we said before, there's a ton of, a lot of work happening around sort of the data foundation that folks are building. But I agree 100%. Until that's in place, I don't think, you can really implement AI widely until you have that single, solid, secure sort of data set that everyone is kind of agree to and use before you kind of build the platform on top of it. So I think, data is really all about that until we get to sort of the outside parts of AI. You can build to that.
I'm going to look again through the lens of credentialing to answer this question. If you look at the role of the individuals within credentialing and AI, specifically, there is the provider, there is the credentialer, which is often referred to as a knowledge worker, and then there are third parties often involved in the process. With respect to what Modio and OneView is attempting to do, it's really around data in relation to the provider and data in relation to the knowledge worker or credentialer, and creating efficiencies for both parties. Now, within the space, the application process for a provider, whether it's the initial or re-credentialing application process specifically is very inefficient. And there are many knowledge workers or credentialers that are completing that application process on behalf of providers. And so for a provider that's doing the application process, it's around access to the information they need to complete the process. And the same applies to the credentialer. The credentialer is trying to input or correct or review the data that the provider has added or help the provider along in the process. So where we see the greatest opportunity is to make it efficient, not only for the provider and entering data as far as the application process, but also the knowledge worker or credentialer that is doing that process on behalf of the provider. Now, it's difficult because if you think about it, when you're dealing with multiple parties that are involved, whether it's the provider or the credentialer, or even the organization that the completed application needs to go to, you don't necessarily have programmatic access to data that is comprehensive and accurate and complete. The provider has a challenge getting access to their latest information. The coordinators or credentialers have access getting information to validate the information the provider's giving. And the system that you submit it to, whether it be with a healthcare organization, doesn't have the methods by which to sort of automatically confirm that what you have submitted is accurate and comprehensive and complete. And so along the ways, we have all these hops of information that are inaccurate, and we have frictions or barriers to sort of interoperability or sharing of information and correcting of information and governing that information. So where we really see, it's not that we're necessarily, if there's a player that is already doing a great job at aggregating information, let's say, I'll use the AMA as an example, our intention is not to replace what the AMA is doing. The AMA is doing a phenomenal job at, sort of aggregating primary source information in a sort of format that can be shared, not only to facilitate the application process, but also to help those knowledge workers or credentialers. Our goal is to work in tandem with an AMA to sort of help all the individuals along in the process, but not necessarily be, looking to replace AMA as let's say, as a solid partner. And I think that's what's critical to the overall process, is sort of looking at it, agnostically, with all of the players involved, and knowing the limitations of what's available to you that can lend itself to machine learning or getting into an LLM, versus what's not and what's friction filled because there's barriers to sharing information in the process.
Yeah, and then I'll kind of build on what Rich said around data. And I like to oversimplify things. And when I think of credentialing, really, it's kind of, in my mind, really three probably steps. One is your data requirements. What do the payers need? What do the state, the medical licensing boards need? What does the hospital need? Those are your requirements. There's then sort of the data inputs that Rich is mentioning, that data integrity is so important, where it's not just first name, last name, it's NPI, it's work history and education. And then kind of the third piece is your data sort of outputs, where Rich was mentioning sort of data interoperability, where how do I get this data then into an online form, an Excel report, a PDF. So it's really around, kind of those three things. And I think, we look at sort of the credentialing world as far as sort of AI technology is concerned, it's still sort of very early on. We are seeing sort of evolution into more centralized data. Rich mentioned AMA. There's a lot of sort of companies trying to centralize this data, get really single, accurate sources of truth to this data. So the foundation is starting to being built for layering on sort of AI on top of it, and it's sort of getting closer. But I still think, as far as applying these technologies, we're probably 5-10 years away until we can actually see something. But I think the biggest piece that folks are working on is this data sort of integrity, data gathering, and input piece of things, where how can we trust the data that we're getting? How do we get it more sort of automatically, because it is just repetitive, both in the getting of the data and the inputting of the data into multiple forms, multiple times. So that's something we're seeing, sort of a shift in the market today, where a lot of platforms are going after kind of the data outside of sort of workflows and tracking. So really, really interesting time, I think.
Yeah, and Parissa, to continue a little bit, I'll use an analogy. When you're in software development, you're often betting on, picking the right sort of technology. In the early days of picking a program language, there were days where you had sort of ASP versus, JSP as a programming language. Then you start getting into JavaScript languages and Vue, React, and Angular. So you're picking the right language there. And in crypto, you're picking the right platform, whether it's Solana or, Ethereum or Polkadot. These are all different bets that you're making in technology on picking the right horse in the race or the platform. And I feel like AI, we know it's here to stay and we know how important it is, but we're also at a sort of critical point, an inflection point where choosing the right technology and partner is going to be critical to sustaining your sort of future vision for use of AI. And it's very easy, to get into the race too early and pick the wrong horse in the race. And there are a lot, there's Google, there's Amazon, there's Facebook, there's Anthropic, there's all sorts of players in the space that are trying to move it forward. And one thing that we know today, which is comparable to even, sort of crypto, is it's very costly, it's very inefficient. There's a lot of processing involved, and you're still looking for the value to be extracted from your investment in the platform.
Do you think there's like a winner right now, or anyone winning?
I mean, it's interesting because even, Microsoft sort of came out and said, right, OpenAI is now a competitor, and I think a lot of times you kind of see that fake it till you make it, right? You choose a right partner and you have a great sort of relationship with that partner, but then you eventually go on to develop it for yourselves. And then you sort of have to declare that they're no longer your partner and I'm going to build it again. Right. It's kind of like, think of maps with Apple and Google and so on. So I think we're still in a place where we don't know, is it OpenAI or, is it ChatGPT? And then we're all on Amazon, a lot of us. So is it going to be Amazon at the end of the day? And I think, there are players that are emerging at the top, but I don't know that we necessarily know who's, going to be the strongest at the end of the day. So there's a number, one of the ones when you're coming down to training a model is bias. The bias is a big problem. You'll often hear about what's called hallucinations in AI. To be honest, I was reading an article that was like, why are you calling it a hallucination when it's just flat out wrong? So, bias or biases and sort of incorrect or information in the model is challenging. Having a statistically significant amount of data to train a model is also, going to be challenging. So for example, if let's say you're going off state licensure and you have all the licensure and you have multiple vendors giving you licensure data, but at the end of the day, you need to get the data from the source itself to train the model. Otherwise, you're training information that's been aggregated. You may not have access to the model. So access, the ability to programmatically integrate with another vendor who is the source to, sort of consume the data as well as share back the information so that you can correct it at the source. Those are all barriers. And then privacy and security are definitely going to be challenges. A lot of primary source searches within the organization that credentialers are doing are handing over social security numbers and date of birth and other sort of personally identifying information to run searches on behalf of providers. So you have to have a good policy within your organization so you're not just giving away providers data, secure data like their date of birth and their social security number in order to go and run, to verify if they're on OIG, for example, or SAM, to find if they're on an exclusion list. We run background checks, we're giving information away in order to get results. And we have to trust when we give that information away that the individuals or organizations are going to be ethical in their sort of use of that information, that it's not going to extend outside the organization. And so for us, we have a very strict policy when we work with clients coming onto our cloud platform, that we are not looking to be a reseller of information to other parties when they're using that information for us to sort of make credentialing more efficient for them. And that's, you have to have that sort of ethical standard and policy that's governing you so that there isn't misuse of information that you're giving away in support of trying to make it more efficient for the provider and for credentialers.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what Rich said. I think trust and trust in the data is probably one of the biggest ones, and I think hurdles that we face even today, where if you as a credential pull data on a specific provider, there's still sort of policies and bylaws that state, with that data, I still need, someone to pull that data. Additionally, I still need to see a PDF of that data. There's a number of checks and balances that, were put in place, I think, to protect, patients, make sure we're getting the best quality providers out there, but is also a hurdle to making things move quicker. We've checked this provider once. We know that their license is valid. Why do I need to do that again? Or why do I need to check and recheck sort of education and work history multiple times on a single provider when it's happened? So, I think that's probably one of the bigger hurdles that we'll see, where it's less around implementing technology, but more changing sort of the governing bylaws of healthcare systems and hospitals, changing sort of the processes of sort of state and federal sort of governing boards, which is really difficult. Like we see it kind of happening. There's the state compacture, or what's it called? The IL, Interstate Licensure Compact. Thank you. Where instead of having to get, with telemedicine and doctors wanting to work in different states, instead of having to get licenses in every single state, you can do it through this compact, which is great, but slow moving. But there's definitely more and more traction there. So a lot of it will, I think technology will have to move hand in hand with policy, and we know that is a little bit more slow going in the healthcare space. So definitely some promising stuff, but I think we'll have to see where that goes and how that can move at the same time. But at the same time, you do have some larger governing bodies and larger organizations trying to push that forward. We mentioned AMA, these Joint Commission on CQA, those types of, I think, organizations can have and can push things forward a lot faster than sort of individual companies and technology.
Carissa, one of the other questions is, everyone asked is AI going to take my job? And I think our belief here, is that credentialers are always going to be critical to the overall process. They are, in essence, the individuals that are training the models, and these are imperfect models. These are models that need correction, to get to where we trust the data. And I believe that the credentialers will always play a critical role in the correction of the data. Now, where could we see a benefit is that those credentialers might be able to process and handle more and more credentialing, more and more credentialing for providers at scale, without necessarily needing to add more manual labor in order to, scale the credentialing process as your number of providers increases. So in our opinion, we think that credentialers will always be important to the process, but we also feel, given all the inefficiencies, that we can work to try and make it so that credentialers can handle more and process more and sort of eliminate some of the rote nature of what credentialing means.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for going into that. I think a lot of people are afraid of, is AI going to replace me in the future? And so the fact that this goes hand in hand into say that AI is going to assist me and not replace me, I think is a great key point that you just touched on. So thanks for going into that. Okay, that was great information, guys. Through AI, we can build a healthcare system where credentialing is no longer a bottleneck. By streamlining processes and reducing errors, we can accelerate time to market for new providers, ultimately improving access for patients. Thanks for joining us today. We hope this conversation sparked your interest about the transformative power of AI in healthcare credentialing.